Welcome to this celebration of the art of translation, the Society of Authors Translation Awards in tandem with the British Centre for Literary Translation's Sebald Lecture, the latter following directly on from these awards. Tonight we are proud to present no fewer than 8 of the Society of Authors' long-standing translation awards, and en route listen to readings from many of the winning translators. This evening can't begin without first celebrating those who have made these awards possible. Happily, they are all represented here tonight. Sponsors from the many cultural organisations and embassies behind these prizes, dedicated and enthusiastic judges who have worked on the awards, British and English language publishers who continue to introduce translated foreign literature into the UK, and, of course, the creators of these winning and commended translations. And in an evening dedicated to proclaiming the cultural benefits and importance of translation, it couldn't be more fitting that Sir Peter Stothard of the Times Literary Supplement, which has provided the strongest of support to English and translated literature for more than a century, is with us to make the presentations. We're going to begin with the John Florio Prize for Translation from the Italian, which has been awarded biennially for the past 45 years and sponsored, as I very much hope you can see from the screen above and behind, by the Italian Cultural Institute, Arts Council England, and the Society of Authors. The judges of the £2,000 John Florio Prize this year were Dr. Laura Rorato and Marina Warner.
So, yes, the judges chose to commend 2 books jointly. Fabio Gueda's In the Sea There Are Crocodiles, translated by Howard Curtis and described by Marina Warner as a searing story of the contemporary world, a real-life testimony from a child refugee in prose that brings the child vividly before us. Laura Rorato particularly admired the way in which the translation renders beautifully the rhythm of the original text and the idiosyncratic nature of the child's voice. As forced by his mother to leave his country, he embarks on a long journey which eventually takes him to Italy via Pakistan, Iran, Turkey, and Greece. So the prize for Howard Curtis, please. Where's Howard Curtis?
Answer came there none.
Answer came there none. Well, in that case, the applause for Howard Curtis is entirely... Oh, he is here. Is he? See, it says on my form, present certificate to Howard Curtis. You know, I mean, we're very sensitive.
Thank you very much.
The other commended choice falls on Tizio Scarpa's Stabat Mater, set in Venice, in the convent where Vivaldi became a choirmaster. Be it prayer, reverie, entreaty, psalm, cantata, the voice of the orphan heroine covers the story in different forms of direct address, and it is a spare and touching drama of a young girl's emancipation. Sean Whiteside's delicate translation has the lyrical and intense innocence of the original, rendering its poetic nature with elegance and precision. So, Sean Whiteside. Let's go. Let's see, yes. Now, Marina Warner described the winning book, Scent of a Woman by Giovanni Arpino, as raw, powerful story of wreckage, bungling, rage, and distorted heroism, dramatizing in vivid close-up a blinded army officer and offering at the same time a strange allegory of love. The publishers have used the title of the 2 films inspired by the novel, though a closer rendering of the original title would be Darkness and Honey. Anne Milano Appel's winning translation captures the dynamism and presence of the characters to give us, at last, a modern classic by a writer too little known beyond Italy. Anne Milano Appel is not able to be here this evening, and Rose Goddard of Penguin will accept the award on her behalf. Do we have Rose Goddard?
Anne Milano Appel has written, "It is extremely gratifying to have been named winner of the John Florio Prize, and I'm grateful to Adam Freudenheim, then an editor at Penguin, for offering me the opportunity to translate Giovanni Arpino's wonderful book." Arpino's blind captain Fausto is complex and human. You feel compassion towards him. Though he is a proud man and a self-sufficient one, and though he drinks quite a bit, he's not a bully. He can be rude, impolite, dictatorial, and unbearable, yet there is a poignancy to him, something that stirs compassion. This is a man who displays weakness and virtues, as well as a certain dignity. I love the passage about the lion, Sam, because it not only shows us the frustration he battles daily, but makes us feel his humanity. From the bathroom, he dictated the morning's plans. First a barber, then a walk to the zoo, finally an outdoor restaurant. Provided we don't come across a sung mass. Don't you love them? To me, they seem perfect, even without being able to understand the words. The avenue stretched straight ahead of us, glazed by the sun, with tall, slender trees along the sidewalks. It was deserted, just a few clusters of young people scattered in front of a cafe, their mocking voices raucous. The houses followed in a row, all the same, their windows shuttered. The bamboo cane clanged blithely against the shutters over and over again. And I complain about Rome, bastard that I am. Nothing but jealousy. It's open to you, Rome is. Feel it, barbarian or not. What a day. Good for the soul, he said impulsively. He settled down in front of the lion cage. Gentle gusts of wind raised clouds of dust from the paths. Beyond some shrubs, the outlines of taller cages could be seen. From a pine tree came the shrill screeching of birds. He took a deep whiff. What's he doing? Sleeping? Every now and then he opens one eye, I told him. He doesn't stink, he said resentfully, and what I really like about animals is their gamey odour. He nudged me with his elbow, handed me the cane. Try to stir him up. Get him angry. Christ, let's hear you, he commanded, irritated. I held out the cane, shook it a few inches from the bars. The lion opened its jaws wearily without even breathing. His upper lip fell back slowly, docilely over his canines. He lowered his head again, winking. He won't budge, I said. Goddamn world. I bet they stuff them with pills in this place. They must even kill off their fleas with flea powder, he said angrily, stamping his foot. That's why he's just lying there like a prick. There wasn't a soul along the path. The squeals of children reached us from afar, mingled with the basking of seals. A yellow balloon rose up above the tree line, floating in the sunlight. I stood, flung my arms wide, let out a cry. The lion, bored, looked slowly away. What time do they feed him? It says 11:30. Too late. I want to hear him now. Right away, he objected. I kicked at the wooden railing that separated us from the bars. I tried to lean closer. The lion shifted his haunches with deliberate voluptuousness, his head motionless, his gaze lost in space. Big? Big, yeah, male, with a dark mane, from Kenya. His name is Sam. Fuck, he muttered. At the corner of the railings were two signs with descriptions and warnings. I'll give you a good whipping, Sam, he threatened through clenched teeth. He leant forward just a little, his right hand firmly on the railing, brandishing his wooden glove. The lion shifted his gaze from his distant target and stared at him with a first quick gasp. From the depths of his lungs he blew a viscid breath that gradually grew into panting, his black eyes flashing. In a bound, the lion was against the bars, his mane bristling. He roared, bits of straws hanging from his pale belly, his claws slashing the air ferociously, only to end up grating on the iron. Friendly, you see? He calmed down immediately. nodding happily at the groans that now rumbled forth, muffled by the animal's agitated pacing. "Smell that? You can even smell his odour now," he sniffed. The lion circled around 2 or 3 times, panting, before curling up again in the most remote corner of the cage, his teeth still bared. "Let's go," he took my arm again. "Of course, the gorillas are more easily riled. There's nothing like gorillas." Now, on to celebrate the Calouste Gulbenkian Prize for Translation from the Portuguese. The £3,000 award has been presented triennially, and it is open to writing from Portugal and other Portuguese-speaking countries. It is supported and sponsored by the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation. Judges for the prize were Dr. Ana Margarida Martins and Dr. Patricia Oda de Balberta.
Now, there really can't be many occasions when this happens, but the same translator is both commended for this award, and she is also the winner. So first, for Antonio Lobo Antunes, The Land at the End of the World, described by the judges as the iconic novel of the post-colonial era, first published in 1979, 5 years after the cessation of Portugal's war in Angola, in which the author served as an army medic. Lobo Antunes is known for the density of his writing style, characterized by lengthy sentences peppered with original, innovative metaphors and a breathtaking range of vocabulary that reflects an equally wide spectrum of cultural knowledge. Not an easy read in Portuguese. And it is very much to the translator's credit that she has negotiated the complexities of the source text to produce an English version that loses none of the verbal pyrotechnics. This great novel has the rare distinction of now having been translated twice. Margaret Jull Costa's new translation must be considered definitive. So Margaret Jull Costa is commended for this, and we can applaud that. I think we should. Dr. Martins points out that the winning book, The Word Tree, by Theolinda Gersau, stands today as the only English translation of a novel that deals with the Portuguese colonial experience from a female viewpoint. Her fellow judge admires Gersau's quiet, understated, and intimate writing that offers her readers a privileged insight into the complexities of colonial society. This is achieved through a first-person narrative in which we share the memories and consciousness of a girl child who somehow crosses the boundary between Portuguese incomers and the African population with which they are compelled to interact. Margaret Jull Costa's meticulous translation fully succeeds in conveying the texture of colonial life in 1960s Mozambique, from the wonder experienced by the very young Gita to the unease and forebodings engendered by the spectre of a colonial war. The language of the translation matches the intimacy of the original Portuguese and offers readers a new kind of post-colonial writing. At last, Margaret Jull Costa.
Yes, I mean, Peter has explained what the novel is about. It's a novel I really love. You know, it's the language and the evocation, I think, particularly of a child's viewpoint of Mozambique. She was born in Mozambique, the narrator. Her father and mother both come from Portugal. Her father has adapted completely and loves Africa, loves Mozambique as much as Gita, the daughter, does. Amelia, her mother, came later, and although she came from Salazar's Portugal, which is not a nice place to have been, she hates Mozambique. She feels it's sort of beneath her. And she finds it humiliating having to live with black people. And whereas Gita feels that her true mother is Loya, who is a black maid, and she feels that Loya is everything she would like to be. So it's very much a book about differences, about cultural differences, and about being in the world, I think, really. The descriptions are extraordinary. I'll just read the two opening pages, if I may. To reach the backyard, you had to go through the narrow kitchen door. And although it's true that the kitchen was dark, you could still see all the objects in it. The aluminium pans and fat pots, the jugs and enamel bowls, the old white oven with its brass rings, the big table with a marble top on which some piece of crockery had always been left out by mistake. But you tended to ignore the kitchen. You didn't really look at it, but ran in the direction of the yard as if you were being sucked towards it by the light. And you staggered a little as you went through the door because you were blinded for a few seconds and only the smell and the heat guided your first steps. The smell of earth, grass, and overripe fruit that wafted to you on the warm wind were like the breath of some living animal. Everything in the backyard danced. The broad leaves of a banana tree, the flowers and leaves of the hibiscus, the still tender branches of the jacaranda, the blades of grass that grew like weeds and against which, after a certain point, we gave up the struggle. It was only when you lay down in the grass that you noticed how slender the jacaranda leaves were, sweeping the sky, and how the sun was a blue and gold eye watching, blinding all others, so that only he could see. Up there above the garden and the house, the sun was the only seeing eye. But as I said, you didn't need eyes to see because you could do that, even with them shut, through your closed lids inundated with light. The chicken wire on the hen coop at the back of the yard, the wall, the tiled roof of the house, the windows, the dark doorway always open, the balcony on the first floor, where at the end of the day Laureana would sit drinking a beer. You didn't need eyes to see because you knew everything. It was yours. You didn't even need to hope or wish for anything because things simply happened of their own accord and came to meet you. And so, for example, at the end of the day, you just had to raise your head to see Laureano sitting out on the balcony. The night fell, like a dark glass of dark beer spilled by the sky, or like an eyelid closing, because the dusk came quickly. Well, there wasn't really any dusk to speak of. There was no gradual transition. It was either dark or light. Down below, where Laureana was sitting on the balcony, the garden grew like a wild thing. A sorghum plant would sprout from seed dropped by accident or put out for the birds. A clandestine beanstalk would shoot up among the daisies. Brambles and nettles and nameless weeds grew among the golden shower orchids and the bauhinia. Any seed carried by the wind eventually burgeoned into green leaves licked by the summer rains. And Amelia would say, frowning, "The garden's turning into a jungle," and she'd slam the window shut. It wasn't a garden, it was a wilderness, which you either loved or hated. There were no half measures because you couldn't compete with it. It was there and it surrounded us, and you were either part of it or you weren't. Amelia wasn't, or didn't want to be. That's why she continued to try and tame it. "I want this swept," she would say to Loya. No fruit peel could be left lying on the ground, no seed or stone be thrown down. That kind of thing might be all right in the shanty towns, she would say, about anything that displeased her, but not here. And so the house was divided in two, the White House and the Black House. The White House belonged to Amelia, the Black House to Loya. The yard surrounded the Black House. I belonged to the Black House and to the yard. Thank you very much.
Now we turn to the Hellenic Foundation Prize for Translation from the Modern Greek. This prize has been in existence for 10 years. It is sponsored by the Hellenic Foundation for Culture and Arts Council England, and the judges for the year were Dr. Dimitris Siovias, and Sarah Wheeler.
So first, the book commended by the judges, who were in agreement that Anne Stanton-Eef deserved congratulation. In the view of Dimitris Siovas, she had translated one of the most powerful examples of recent European migrant literature in Hasmen Kaplani's A Short Border Handbook, a memoir describing the haunting and surreal atmosphere of totalitarian Albania and a fixation with border crossings. Stanton-Eef manages to capture the book's laconic and witty style and to convey the painful experience of a migrant. Anne Stanton-Eef, please. Who's she here? And now to the winner of the Hellenic Foundation for Culture Translation Prize, Dimitris Siovas, reflected, bearing in mind how many English translations of Cavafy there are already, the challenge is to demonstrate distinctiveness and freshness. This elegant and sensitive translation succeeds admirably and could easily earn a place among the most readable translations of the Greek poet. And Sarah Wheeler added, this translation captures Cavafy's understated lyricism and irony quite brilliantly. Avi Sharon brings a fresh poetic sensibility to the work of a master. Avi Sharon.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank the Foundation and, of course, the judges and the Society of Authors for recognizing this translation. There have been so many others. Sometimes it's hard to justify another translation of a poet who is so well translated and who was so spread across modern literary culture. And I just want to say that briefly, one of the things that is probably less championed about Cavafy is the degree to which he is so influential across other languages. Of course, English, I think of James Merrill, Auden, Derek Mann, and others, but of course other languages too, Montale, Brodsky, and others have written about him and written influenced by him. And maybe it's his international, global quality is the thing that's most Greek about him. I'm just going to read 5 poems. Voices. Ideal voices. The beloved voices of those who have died or of those who are lost to us as if they were dead. Sometimes they speak to us in dreams, sometimes in thought the mind hears them. And with their sounds, for a moment, return sounds from our life's first poetry, like music at night, far off, fading out. He vows. Every now and then, he vows to live a better life. But when night comes with her own counsels, with her promises and her compromises, when night comes with her power over the body that seeks and yearns, he returns lost to the same fatal pleasures. To live. It must have been 1 o'clock in the morning, or 1:30, in a corner of the tavern, behind the wooden partition. Except for us, the space entirely empty. An oil lamp was barely glowing. The waiter on the night shift lay dozing at the door. No one could have seen us. Regardless, we'd reached such a state already, we were past all thought of caution. Our clothes half undone now, the few we had on, with divine July burning. Gratification of the flesh between half-opened clothes, the quick bearing of the flesh, the ideal image of it has traveled across 26 years and now has come to live in these verses. Of colored glass. I am quite touched by one detail in the coronation at Flacernae of John Cantacuzénos and Irene, daughter of Andronicus Asom. Because they had only a few precious stones, the poverty of our wretched kingdom being so great. They wore artificial gems, hundreds of pieces made of glass, red, green, and blue. There's nothing base or undignified, in my view, about these little bits of colored glass. On the contrary, they seem like a sorrowful protest against the undeserved misfortunes of the crown. They are the symbols of what should have been worn, of what assuredly ought to have been worn at the coronation of Lord John Cantacuzénos and his lady Irene, daughter of Andronicus Asom. And then last, Ithaca. When you start on your way to Ithaca, pray that the journey be long, rich in adventure, rich in discovery. Do not fear the Cyclops, the Lastrygonians, or the anger of Poseidon. You'll not encounter them on your way if your thoughts remain high, if a rare emotion possesses you, body and soul. You will not encounter the Cyclops, the Lastrygonians, or savage Poseidon if you do not carry them in your own soul, if your soul does not set them before you. Pray that the journey be a long one, that there be countless summer mornings when, with what pleasure, what joy, you drift into harbors never seen before, that you make port in Phoenician markets and purchase their lovely goods, coral and mother of pearl, ebony and amber, and every kind of delightful perfume. Acquire all the voluptuous perfumes that you can, then sail to Egypt's many towns to learn and learn from their scholars. Always keep Ithaca fixed in your mind. Arrival there is your destination, yet do not hurry the journey at all. Better that it lasts for many years, and you arrive an old man on the island, rich from all that you have gained on the way, not counting on Ithaca for riches. For Ithaca gave you the splendid voyage. Without her, you would never have embarked. She has nothing more to give you now. And though you find her poor, she has not misled you. You, having grown so wise, so experienced from your travels, by then you will have learned what Ithacas mean. Thanks very much.
And now to the 7th award of the annual £3,000 Saif Hobash Banipal Prize, sponsored most generously by Omar Saif Hobash and the Hobash family and the Banipal Trust for Literature. There were 4 judges this year: Fadil Al-Azawi, who travelled from Berlin to be at the judging meeting, Esther Freud, Ruth Padel, and John Peet.
The judge's choice of commended book fell on I Was Born Here, I Was Born There by Murid Barghouti, translated by a former winner of this award and described by Fadil Al-Azawi as one of the masters of translation from Arabic into English. For the judges, what Humphrey Davis has done, once again, is to adopt exactly the right palette of both vocabulary and tone in his translation all the way through. The great skill in his translation is not just in the sophisticated understanding of the original, which should be beyond doubt, it is also in the rendering of an apparently effortless yet deeply nuanced English prose, beyond which, translators will know, undoubtedly lie long, long hours of intense reflection and research. Davis is a true exemplar to translators in work such as this. Humphrey Davis is not able to be present tonight, so his certificate will be collected by Bill Swainson of Bloomsbury. In the view of the judges, the most important aspect of this historical novel that takes the 13th century Sufi philosopher Ibn Sabin as its hero is its language. The Arabic original is written in a language not only related to its heritage, but also full of contemplations and Sufi ideas. We accompany the main hero on his long journey across different cities and countries, from Spain to Mecca. And this also opens up remarkable historical, cultural, and religious perspectives on the Islamic heritage. It's hard to imagine anyone in the world beside Roger Allen capable of bringing this serious book to English readers. He has succeeded with his wonderful style, not only to turn Himmick's text into brilliant English prose, but also to create a real piece of literature. Roger Allen.
Let me begin by thanking the Saif Kobash Foundation, also the Society of Authors in this year's jury, the Manipal Trust, and above all, I have the honor tonight to tell you that the author himself is in the audience, Ben Salem Hamish. You've just heard this novel described. It is the story of one of Islam's most radical thinkers, both Sufi philosopher, theologian, and physician. And perhaps there's a contemporary aspect in that precisely because of the radical nature of his thought, he is hounded out of basically every place where he tries to settle down, from Spain to North Africa to Egypt. And he finishes in Mecca. And it's in Mecca that I choose to read a passage about something which I think is quite familiar to us, but yet is told in Hamish's unique style. Just before the afternoon prayer time, I went out to perform the prayer in the sacred mosque with the Hanafi group right opposite the holy water spout. As soon as that was over, I headed for a small mosque nearby to watch the flowing crowds all around me and the non-stop flood of people doing the circumambulation. I heard the sound of the muezzin at the Zamzam shrine, raising his voice in a fervent prayer to some foreign potentate who, accompanied by his entourage, was performing the circumambulation. No sooner had he finished his task than I noticed a huge crowd of pilgrims spilling out of the gates of Abraham. I was told they were non-Arabic speakers who were crowding into the sacred enclosure through the other gates as well. They were all rushing towards the blessed waterspout, and the pushing and shoving rose to levels the like of which I have never witnessed in my life. A number of them fell to the ground, either badly hurt, dying of suffocation, or being trampled underfoot. Afraid to move, I stayed where I was, right next to the wall. But then suddenly, I spotted the head of a young girl screaming between the pile of rigid, expiring bodies. Rolling up my sleeve, I plunged into the fray, grabbing her by the hands, and started pulling her out as though she were some poor animal ensnared in the fangs of a ravenous beast. Once I had her on her feet, I noticed she had fainted. So I carried her to the closest rescue station, fully intending to hand her over to the doctor and his orderlies. However, I soon discovered that the place was absolutely teeming with the sick and wounded, all of them waiting for help along with their relatives. Any idea of pushing my way through to the actual diagnosis point was out of the question. So, when somebody who looked like a manager came up behind me, I asked him to help me with this girl who was in imminent danger of dying. He responded in a gruff and surly tone that her condition was no worse than the majority of people who were waiting there. With that, he disappeared without offering me any assistance. I now laid her out on a bench and immediately noticed her pulse was getting weaker, her breathing was slowing down. I was afraid she was close to death. So I started rubbing the edge of her heart and pumping it hard. I then put my mouth over hers, and I started pushing breath into her. I kept doing it until I detected a small flutter of movement, then breathing, and finally a return to consciousness. Some nosy people had been watching what I was doing, and when they saw it had worked, they launched into paeans of praise to God and told me that with God's good graces, I'd restored the girl to life. They assumed she was my daughter, especially since they'd seen her clinging to my arms and my clothing. I now picked her up again and carried her back to my residence. I informed the warden what had happened to the girl, although she had yet to utter a single word. And I asked him to feed her and try to find out her name. With the assistance of my servant, Raylan, he relieved me of all involvement with this girl, and I retired to my quarters to recover my breath and relax. Next day at lunchtime, the warden informed me he'd found out from the pilgrimage group that the girl was from Khorasan, and he'd now managed to restore the girl to her father and aunt. Her mother had died of suffocation in yesterday's mob scene. He told me that tragedies such as this happened every year, something that caused us both to seek refuge in God Almighty from such calamities. With great emotion, he prayed that my pilgrimage would be blessed and fruitful and well received by God. He proposed to me that the servant Raylan, who was eager to perform the pilgrimage as well, should go with me, and I accepted the idea with great pleasure. Before going upstairs to my quarters, I asked him if there was any news of our beloved friend, the Sufi poet Ashushtari. He replied, the only information he had come in the form of a dream, to the effect that all was well. Thank you.
The Schlegel-Tieck Prize for translation from the German and named for two poets of the Romantic period has been awarded annually for 47 years. The £3,000 award is sponsored by the Goethe Institute with Arts Council England. Judges this year were Dr. Emily Jeremiah, Dr. Johannes Kaminski, and Dr. Lynn Marvin.
Together, the judges chose to commend Ross Benjamin's clean-cut and congenial translation, Funeral for a Dog, by Thomas Pletzinger, describing his version as a multifaceted, lively, over-the-top read with intertwined narrative threads spanning Brazil, the USA, Germany, and Lugano, Switzerland. It hurtles along, full of life and death. There are multiple voices to contend with, rendered with substantial brio, and Ross Benjamin does justice to this fresh, fast-moving book. Ross Benjamin is alas not able to be present this evening, but I think we'll clap him anyway. And the 2012 winner is described by the judges as a heartrending and astonishingly fresh book, Why the Child is Cooking in the Polenta, which vividly evokes the life of the daughter of travelling circus performers. Aglaya Veteranyi weaves tragedy and comedy together, conveying fear and loss through sparkling language and startling imagery. Vincent Kling's translation fully preserves the linguistic freshness of the original and successfully recreates its tragicomical ambiguity. His thoughtful transposition refuses to make undue concessions to the target language and thereby preserves the delicate and original style which lies at the heart of Veteranyi's lyrical prose. A revelation. Professor Vincent Kling has travelled from Philadelphia to be here with us tonight.
Well, of course I traveled from Philadelphia. I wouldn't have missed this for the world. And in addition to thanking everyone who was involved, I need to say that my being connected in any way with W.G. Sebald and other distinguished translators here elevates me. So I would like to read the opening and the closing pages and then provide a little bridge to explain some of the narration in between. I'm picturing what heaven is like. It's so big, I fall asleep right away to calm down. When I wake up, I know God's smaller than heaven. If he weren't, we'd constantly be falling asleep from fright whenever we pray. Does God speak other languages? Can he understand foreigners too? Or are there angels sitting in little glass booths and translating? And is there really a circus in heaven? Mother says there is. Father laughs. He's had some bad experiences with God. If God were really God, he'd come down and help us out, he says. But why should he come down when we're going to take a trip up there later on to see him anyway? Men don't believe in God as much as women and children do. They don't like the competition. My father doesn't want God to be my father either. Here, every country is in a foreign country. The circus is always in a foreign country, but the trailer is home. I open the trailer door as little as possible so that home won't evaporate. My mother's roasted eggplants smell like home everywhere, no matter what country we're in. My mother says we get a lot more out of our own country when we're in a foreign country because all the food from our country is for sale in foreign places as well. If we were at home, would everything smell the way it does in foreign countries? I know my own country only by smell. It smells like my mother's cooking. My father says you remember the smell of your country no matter where you are, but only recognize it when you're far away. And what does God smell like? My mother's cooking smells the same everywhere in the world, but it tastes different in foreign countries because of the melancholy. Besides, we live like rich people here. When we're finished eating, we can throw the soup bones away with a clear conscience, whereas at home we have to save them for the next pot of soup. My cousin Annika has to stand in line in front of the bakery all night long. The people stand so close together that they can sleep while they're waiting. My mother gets up at dawn and starts cooking by plucking a chicken and holding it over an open gas flame. My mother prefers to buy live chickens because they're the freshest. In a hotel, she slaughters the chicken in the bathtub. Chickens have an international squawk when they're being slaughtered. We understand them wherever they are. Slaughtering in a hotel is prohibited, so we turn the radio up, open the window, and make noise. I don't want to see the chicken beforehand, otherwise I'll want to let it live and keep it. Whatever doesn't go into the soup goes down the toilet. I'm afraid of the toilet, so at night I pee in the sink where the dead chickens won't climb back out. I'm used to arranging things wherever I am so that I feel all right. All I have to do is spread my blue scarf over a chair. That's the sea. Next to my bed, I have the sea. All I have to do to go swimming is get up out of bed. In my sea, you don't have to be able to swim to go swimming. At night, I cover my sea with my mother's robe, the one with flowers on it, so the sharks can't grab me when I have to pee. The father of the family, if indeed he is, leaves abruptly, and the narrator is upset for two reasons. One, the father loved making very elaborate but cheap home movies that she would be the star of, and second, he took away the dog Boxy. So I'll read the ending. Before I saw my father for the last time, he made a movie in which God was one of the characters. My mother played God's grandmother, and I played his guardian angel. I'm wearing my white lace dress, white knee socks, and black patent leather shoes. My fingernails are pink and my cheeks red. Angels always have red cheeks, my father says, because they're out in the fresh air a lot. As God, my father is wearing his old black tuxedo. My mother tied a scarf around her head like the old women from the country in Romania and put on her flowered mourning robe made out of curtain material. At the start of the movie, you see my father as a circus director in a red tuxedo. My grandmother lives in the country, and in her garden, he says, "There's a tree underneath which it's always raining." Then you see my father as God sitting under the tree. Then the dog Boxy runs across the field. He has pink angel's wings in his mouth and sits up to beg in front of a bush I step out from behind. I put the wings on and skip over to the rain tree with Boxy. The rain is falling from a watering can. The guardian angel and Boxy dance to God's sad song, but it doesn't make God any happier. The grandmother is crying. Boxy is whimpering, and he draws his tail in and puts his ears back. The guardian angel keeps on skipping. Guardian angels are never sad, the circus director says. They're there to spread happiness. In the next scene, God, the grandmother, and the guardian angel are sitting at a table and eating polenta as a farewell meal. At the end, the grandmother stands at the door and waves. The end. Thank you.
Now we come to the Scott Moncrief Prize for Translation from the French, another long-standing prize awarded since 1965. It is sponsored by the French Ministry of Culture, the French Embassy, Arts Council England, and the Society of Authors. The judges of this £2,000 award were Dr. Joanna Malt and Michelle Roberts.
The judges commended Giles MacDonough's translation of Blandine Villers' Testiques, Balls in Cooking and Culture, describing it as a tour de force, scholarly, erudite, witty and practical. With its thorough survey of linguistically complex culinary and slang terms, it poses great challenges to the translator, which MacDonagh has met brilliantly. So, and the 2012 winner is hailed by the judges as a masterpiece previously unknown to British readers, a passionate critique of war's brutality seen through the eyes of a young soldier unwilling to live up to heroic convention. Malcolm Imrie's translation of Gabriel Chevalier's Fear serves the book wonderfully well, responding brilliantly to the challenge of finding a suitable idiom with which to render the language and particularly the dialogue. It is a poised and elegant translation which does both the author and his subject beautiful justice. Malcolm Imrie.
Hi, thank you very much. This is a remarkable novel of the First World War. And I first of all want to just thank Pete Ayrton of Serpent's Tail for having the genius to find it and the faith to let me translate a book by a man who I only knew before as the author of the comedy about the church and the urinal. Which was published, Cloche-Mail, some years after this. And somehow this book was overlooked. It shouldn't have been. It's somehow Chevalier manages, in a way that no other novel about the First War I've ever read does, to convey the anger and the scorn against the people who are responsible for it with compassion for the people who are
suffering because of it, and with honesty about the terror and fear that is at the heart of war. And it's also got a bit of humor in it. And it's a good novel to read in these fearful times in Europe, where there's another kind of war going on. I'm just going to read a little passage, and all you need to know for this is that the narrator, Dartmouth, who's effectively Chevalier himself, is in hospital recovering from a shrapnel wound, being nursed by what he calls the young daughters of the bourgeoisie, that his best friend is this wonderful Sergeant Nègre, who has a wicked tongue and invents a character called Baron General de Poculotte, whose voice he uses to convey what the general staff are thinking about the carnage that they're managing. And even the nurses don't like him because he reads sinister authors like Rabelais and Jules Vallée, but they do like him because he's a well-educated middle-class boy. And so they keep bombarding him with questions. And here we go. So what did you do at the front? Nothing worth reporting if you're hoping for feats of prowess. You fought well. I really have no idea. What do you mean by fought? But you were in the trenches. Did you kill any Germans? Not that I know of. But you saw them right in front of you? Never. How can that be, at the front line? Yes, at the front line I never saw a living armed German before me. I only saw dead Germans. The job had been done, and I think I preferred it that way. So what have you actually done in the war? What I was ordered to do, no more and no less. I'm afraid there's nothing very glorious in it, and none of the efforts I was compelled to make were in the least prejudicial to the enemy. Oh, you do get on my nerves. That's not an answer. I asked what you did. Yeah, well, all right. What did I do? I marched day and night without knowing where I was going. I did exercises. I had inspections. I dug trenches. I carried barbed wire. I carried sandbags. I did lookout duty. I was hungry and I had nothing to eat. I was thirsty, had nothing to drink. Tired without being able to sleep. Cold without being able to get warm. And I had lice without always being able to scratch. Will that do for you? That's all? Yeah, that's all. Or no, that's not all. That's nothing. Would you like to know the chief occupation in war, the only one that really matters? I was afraid. I must have said something really disgusting and obscene. They gave a little indignant shriek and ran off. I saw the revulsion on their faces. From the looks they exchanged, I could guess their thoughts. What a coward. How can this man be French? One nurse, Mademoiselle Berniol, asked me rather insolently, "So you are afraid, Dartmouth?" A very unpleasant word to have thrown at you in public by a young woman, and quite an attractive one at that. I took a moment to let the word, with all its obsolete shame, sink in and accepted it. I answered her slowly, looking her in the face. "Indeed, mademoiselle, I am afraid. Still, I'm in good company." "Are you claiming that others are also afraid?" "Yes. It's the first time I've ever heard such a thing, and I must say I find it very hard to accept. When you're afraid, you run away." Sergeant Nègre, who wasn't asked at all, comes to my rescue spontaneously with this sententious statement. The man who flees has one inestimable advantage over the most heroic corpse. He can still run. His support is disastrous. I can feel that our situation is getting seriously out of hand and sense a collective rage rising up in these women like the one that possessed the mobs in 1914. I quickly intervene. No, calm down. No one runs away in war. You can't. Aha, you can't. But what if you could? They're looking at me. I scan their faces. If you could, everyone would take to their heels. And Nègre can no longer restrain himself. Yes, everyone, no exceptions. French, German, Austrian, Belgian, Japanese, Turkish, African, the lot. If you could, I'd tell you it'd be like a great offensive in reverse. A bloody great charroi in every direction, every country, every language. Mademoiselle Berniol, standing between our beds like a gendarme at a crossroads, tries to put a stop to this rout. And the officers, she snaps? Generals were seen charging at the head of their divisions. Yes, so it's said. They marched with the troops once to show off, to play to the gallery, or simply because they didn't know what would happen, just as we didn't the first time. Once, but not twice. When you've tasted machine gun fire in open ground once, you're not going to go there again for the fun of it. You can bet that if generals had to go over the top, they wouldn't launch attacks so lightly. "Oh, this is quite dreadful talk," says Mademoiselle Bernier, pale with fury. It is painful to watch her, and we get the feeling it might be wise to change the subject. Then Nègre turns the tables. "Don't get all het up, mademoiselle. We're exaggerating. We have all done our duty courageously. It's not so bad now. We are starting to get covered trenches with all the modern conveniences. There's still no gas for cooking, but we already have gas for the throat. We have running water every day that it rains, eiderdown sprinkled with stars at night, and when our rations don't arrive, we don't mind at all. We eat the bosh." He asks the whole ward, "Be honest, lads, hasn't the war been fun? It hasn't half been fun. An absolute scream. Hey, Nègre, what does General Poquelot have to say?" "Ah, the general told me. I know why I see such sadness in your eyes, little soldier of France. Take courage. We will all soon be back to our pig stickers. I know how you love your bayonet, little soldier. Yay, hurrah for the bayonet. Long live Rosalie. Long live Poquelot. Thank you, my children, thank you. Soldiers, you will always know I am behind you at the hour of battle, and you will always see me in front of you, boots polished and brass shining, on the parade ground. We are together in life, in death. Yes, yes, soldiers, I will send you against machine guns, and will you destroy them? The machine guns don't exist. Soldiers, I will send you against artillery, and will you silence those guns? We'll shut their mouths for good. Soldiers, I will throw you against the Imperial Guards, and will you crush the Imperial Guards? We'll crush them into meatballs. Soldiers, will nothing stop you? Nothing, General. Soldiers, I can feel your impatience, sense how your generous blood is boiling. Soldiers, soon I won't be able to hold you back. Soldiers, I can see it. You want an offensive. Yes, yes, an offensive now. Forward, forward. The whole room is gripped by warlike delirium. People are imitating the rattle of machine guns, the whistle of shells, explosions. Roars and shouts of hatred and triumph evoke the frenzy of an attack. Projectiles are thrown, bedside tables shaken. Everyone joins in the fun. The nurses rush to calm it down and stop the noise disturbing patients in the other wards. Sergeant Nègre has pulled the blankets off his thigh and stuck his wounded leg in the air. He has put an officer's képi on his foot and is waving it around to imitate a capering, conquering general at the head of his army. Thank you.
The Bernard Shaw Prize for translation from the Swedish was begun in 1991, is celebrated triennially, and is sponsored by the Anglo-Swedish Literary Foundation, the Embassy of Sweden, and Arts Council England. The judges were Andrew Brown and Dr. B.J. Epstein.
The judges chose to commend Peter Graves' beautiful translation of Peter Englund's engaging history of the First World War, The Beauty and the Sorrow. So well translated that it actually reads better to Andrew Brown than the original Swedish. Clear, forceful prose, which is almost like Orwell in its transparency and force and unobtrusive command of rhythm. Peter Graves is unable to be here tonight, and Daniel Crew of Profile Books will collect the award on his behalf. The Bernard Shaw Prize goes to Robin Fulton for his translation of Harry Martinson's selected poems, Chickweed Wintergreen. In the judge's view, for two reasons. Swedish poetry of any sort is fiendishly difficult to translate into English, and Martinson uses rhythms and rhymes of Swedish in ways that cannot be reproduced, only at best recreated in English. This Robin Fulton has triumphantly accomplished, overcoming great difficulties with apparent ease, which makes the poetry accessible to a wider audience as it should be. We have no Robin Fulton, who is in Norway, but we do have a message from the winning translator.
Robin Fulton confesses to having suffered from the disease of wanting to translate poems for about half a century. It won't go away. Most of my books of translations have grown bit by bit over decades, but Chickweed Wintergreen is the only such book I've translated to order. What happened was that Kjell Esmark, incidentally, he was on our judging panel for the previous Bernard Shaw Prize in 2009, a prominent Swedish poet and novelist and long-time member of the Swedish Academy, phoned me and asked if I would care to try a book-length selection of Harry Martinson in English. Ignoring the rational half of my brain, I said yes, and afterwards I wondered what I'd let myself in for. It's not surprising that only a few of Martinson's poems have previously found their way into English, for at his best he uses Swedish with such inventiveness and musicality that his lines often defy readable translation. Perhaps that's one good sign of a good poet. At Robin Fulton's suggestion, here is Have You Seen a Steam Collier, one of his early, written in around 1929, and best-known poems. Have you seen a steam collier come from a hurricane? Broken booms, wrenched railings, dented, wheezing, done in, and a captain quite hoarse. Snorting, it ties up at the sunlit quay, dead beat, licking its sores while the steam in the boiler tubes thins away. Harry Martinson ran away from an unhappy childhood, and from the ages of 16 to 23 he worked as a sailor. He was a very varied poet and has been most admired for the way in which he could focus on sharp details of natural life and at the same time convey an awareness of distant perspectives. This is Evening Inland. Silently, the mystery is mirrored. It spins evening in quietened reed beds. Here is a gossamer no one notices threads from grass to grass. Silently, cattle stare with green eyes. Soon, evening calmly, they reach water, and the lake holds to all mouths its giant spoon. And two poems published posthumously. The Smart and Sly Fox. The smart and sly fox I often watch on early mornings in summer, while the houses, still night blind yet windowed, big-eyed, sleep by the morning lake. Smart and sly sidles out of the woods, swerved by his tail. He listens his way from tussock to tussock, playfully ear-pricked, smiling as in a fable. He bowsprings on the spot, sets his front paws together on the right clutch point and nips the bewildered morning vole. And finally, the wind searched in the forest grass and found a word. It sounded like unsayable life, but it was a name the biggest stone gave to the smallest twilight butterfly. Too hard to remember, says the wave. Too fine to be, flickers the wind. Now, straight on to the...
Oh, with some applause.
Now to the Premier Valley Inclán for translation from the Spanish, given annually over the last 15 years since 1997 and sponsored by the Office for Cultural and Scientific Affairs of the Spanish Embassy, the Instituto Cervantes and Arts Council England. The judges for the year were John King, Jeremy Munday and Jason Wilson.
The novel they commended is set in a garrison town on the River Congo, which represents a new theme for the acclaimed Basque writer Bernardo Atzaga. Its jungle setting is dramatic and its historical detail of colonialism depressingly impressive. Margaret Jal Costa, who previously won the Premier Valley Inclán in 2009 with Atzaga's The Accordionist's Son, respects the text of Seven Houses in France, judiciously borrowing proper nouns and culture-specific items to render the historical setting, while at the same time achieving an idiomatic translation that stands on its own as a strong and creative work of literature. A wonderful translation, Margaret Jal Costa. And the winner is Peter Bush's translation of Juan Goytisolo's Exiled from Almost Everywhere, a vision of a nightmare life and afterlife connected by cyberspace where political figures, religious fanatics, and rampant consumer society meld in a world turned upside down. Peter Bush is very sensitive to the multiple shifts of narrative voice and tone and finds inventive and creative solutions that capture the darkness and pessimism, but also the pastiche and wild humour of this unconventional novel. It is a very free translation, finding the right English slang that makes this text by one of Spain's great dissidents vivid and readable. Peter Bush, actually the very first Premier Valle-Inclán winner in 1997, has travelled from Barcelona to be here tonight.
Good evening. Well, I'd like to thank the sponsors and the jury and the Society of Authors and the BCLT for organising this evening and supporting literary translation. When Juan Goytisolo wrote The Blind Rider, it kind of seemed that he wouldn't write another novel. And so we were all surprised when he wrote this novel in his late 70s, particularly a novel that's set in cyberspace, and Juan Goytisolo kind of doesn't know one end of a mouse from the other. I'll read. He himself, of course, has lived in Marrakesh for the last 15 years, more or less totally, but has been in exile from Spain since 1956 and has never returned to live in Spain. The novel has zany characters, a horny rapper, a woman called Alicia who is a mutant and changes into various things from being a stripper to a terrorist. Anyway, proposal for the millennium from a dead web surfer. The genetic design laboratories that specialize in the comparative study of turtles have agreed with the blessing of His Holiness and the great and good in the system and anti-system in the thereafter, to initiate a bold project in line with the new European norms to reduce expenditure and abolish state spending and the taxes stifling the enterprises that generate wealth and work. The scientific analysis of the behavior of turtles and their annual periods of hibernation would allow the creation of a mechanism that could be readily adapted to the citizenry, by dint of which the non-productive needy classes could opt in a pilot program of unquestionable value to enter a state of wintry lethargy that would spare them the need to hunt for a crust of bread during the harshest months of the year, with subsequent savings in capital and human suffering. The creation of comfortable dormitory sheds for those helped in this way would considerably reduce the budget imbalance that's slowing down the economy's recovery, as well as encourage the competitiveness of our consortia in the savage scramble for loot in the global village. The Eros bomb. Military scientists working at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, requested funds from the Pentagon to develop chemical agents that would arouse irresistible lust among the enemy infantry once they were spread across hostile airspaces. The so-called erogenous bomb contained aphrodisiac substances to trigger off collective homoerotic behavior and seriously undermine the defensive capacities of the country targeted. Our hapless hero was alerted by an email and started to daydream. His life was uniformly grey, his horizons zero. His exchange of porno messages with the long-suffering angels of Sodom didn't stir him from his lethargy, and he trawled the lethal ennui of cyberspace, despairing like Munch's scream. Only lurid scenes of a collective orgy of the soldiery could bring a glimmer of light into his deadly routine. One fine day, he decided to offer his services as a guinea pig in that heartening experiment. It wasn't at all easy to identify the necessary target. The many debates on the axis of evil never resolved which component would be the first plausible objective for a preventive strike. He took it upon himself to scout the territory and travelled to the riskiest states. The martial airs of the guards of the Central Command in one such nation quite bewitched him. He took his CV to the Intelligence Services Office, introduced himself as a qualified interpreter, and was sent off to a sensitive, high-risk zone. Providence, ever magnanimous, landed him in a barracks full of idlers, twirling their moustaches and scratching their groins. He imagined the moment when, under the bomb's impact, they dropped their weapons and flourished their scepters at him. He tried to slip between the best endowed, anticipating a blessed epiphany. In the meantime, he tolerated the fiery heat of the desert wind. The days passed slowly and monotonously, punctuated by changes of the guard, reveille, and grub up. None of those brawny youths paid him the least attention. But fully absorbed in his fantasy, he didn't despair. He gazed at the horizon and waited for the rockets that would spark off the massive Saturnalia. In the black of night, he stuck on his night vision goggles and imagined every star bore the tale of the desired artifact. He begged the almighty heavens to let it boom. Nevertheless, his glorious paradise faded like a mirage. As months, then years passed, he adopted a turtle's sluggish torpor. His dreams dried up on him, though he did manage to come out of hibernation and return to his neighborhood, where he initiated a lawsuit against the Armed Forces Laboratory for fraud and breach of promise. He received support from various humanitarian associations and third world collectives, but awoke from his dream the night before a people's jury would declare in his favor. Thank you.
Congratulations to all the winners and commended translators, and thank you so much, Sir Peter, for taking us through it all. If any of you have a moment to fill in the short appraisal forms given to you as you came in, they really are short, please hand them, if you will, to the Society of Authors staff who will be posted at the exit doors. And just to remind you also that copies of the books mentioned this evening will be on sale outside this hall afterwards. But now we hand over to Kate Griffin of the British Centre for Literary Translation to introduce this evening's Sebald lecture.